Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Intelligent Business Process Management Live, where technology meets people and process. Our next guest is going to talk about the technology piece. So I'm very excited about welcoming Michael Procopio. He's a product marketing manager for Micro Focus. And Michael, hello. And Michael's going to talk to us about 5 steps to improving business processes by delivering AIOps. Michael has over 20 years of experience in the industry. He's a product marketing manager for AIOps and Micro Focus, and a wealth of knowledge. And we're really looking forward to your presentation, Michael.
Well, thank you, Jose. All right. Well, let's get to it. So processes, of course, are becoming more and more digital. And what I'm going to talk about is basically the fact that as we move these processes from old ways of working to new ways of working, basically digital, you've got to monitor these processes, because if you don't, you're in danger of not being able to deliver the process that you so carefully designed and brought into production. And I'm also going to talk about how automation becomes very important in keeping those processes up. So this slide shows the DevOps processes. I'm guessing that many of you have heard about DevOps, but I'll just give a quick background. In the old days, developers would write up their code and basically just hand it over to the operations team to deploy without much of working together ahead of time. So in the dev part, what happens is you either take an existing manual process that you have, an example might be filling out an HR form in paper, and then sending it in, and moving that to now HR hands you a URL, says go here, log in, fill out everything on the web form. So that's an example of moving an existing process. An example of a what we would call digital first process might be something like Uber. You couldn't run Uber on paper even if you wanted to. So once you've designed your process or modified your process, then it goes to somebody to do detailed design, probably in coordination with you as the process owner. Then it gets coded up, then it gets tested. And I didn't put this in the diagram, but basically it's when it gets to the test phase, this is where the dev team will bring operations into the fold. And once that's done, it moves into deployment. And at this point, the operations team has some knowledge about what's going on. They start monitoring the process, and I've never seen a process that at some point didn't fail or poorly perform. And in some cases, that's going to be because of the code that was written. In some cases, it's going to be because of the underlying technology that is running that process. So when one of those occurs, it moves over to find the problem and fix the problem. Sometimes operations can fix the problem. For example, you've got an issue with a server, and I'll show you an example of a problem with a database near the end of the presentation. Sometimes, as we said, it's the code. If it's the code, then it goes back to the dev team to fix. If it is something that the operations team can take care of, then they fix it. And then the next goal for operations should be to go ahead and optimize what happens in the infrastructure and automate the fix. And I'm going to show you an example of a company that saved $4 million in 2019 by implementing this automation process. Okay, with that, here's what I'm going to cover. I am going to talk a little bit about RPA and how these operational AIOps steps can help with RPA, because I'm sure RPA is a huge topic for this event. It's been around for years, but it seems to have become all the rage in the last, I don't know, year, 2 years. I'm going to show you some examples of how AIOps has helped folks keep their processes up and running, and then we'll take questions. So first, I wanted to give you a little background on AIOps. AIOps has gone through some iterations. It started out, well, I should say the precursor to it all was big data analytics, and this happened in around 2005. And big data at the time basically said, I've got more data than I can handle on one computer or one database, and so I need to figure out some way to crunch through all that data. And then the beginnings of machine learning were applied to that. In 2014, Gartner, which is pretty much the leading analyst in the area, coined the term IT operations analytics. And this was basically the application of big data to IT operations. The big issue with IT operations analytics was it only worked from a historical point of view. So the data would be in this big data analytics field. They would apply operations to find insights, but those insights took quite a while to happen, to find. And so you did get to benefit from it, but not in time to actually fix a problem. Then in 2017, Gartner revised this whole thing and called it AIOps, which is artificial intelligence for IT operations. And the big shift there was we got enough processing power to be able to work this into real time. So basically, you could now have the system find a problem and provide you with information that you could use to fix the problem while it was actually happening. And the most recent thing is what we call multi-domain AIOps, and I'm going to talk about that in detail. So from a more practical point of view, what is AIOps? This is also sourced from Gartner. Basically, it boils down to this: collect every piece of data that you can in the IT operations world and put it somewhere that a machine learning algorithm or algorithms, plural, can act on it and analyze it and provide you with some kind of insight. These happen to be the 4 big ones: digital experience monitoring, which for digital processes is one of the most important things. And this term is another one that's fairly recent. And the idea of digital experience is not only humans, but also we've now gotten into a case where machines are interacting with our processes. And so it's the measurement of whether it's a human or whether it's a machine acting, looking at that. Networks, very important. Application performance monitoring, which is actually the term that digital experience monitoring grew out of, includes not only user experience monitoring, so looking at it the way a human would, but also looking at any of the infrastructure with regard to that application. And then, of course, IT infrastructure monitoring. So those are the 4 biggies right now that play into this. So Analyst EMA did some research and looked at what is it that you should be looking for in an AIOps solution. The first one is cross-domain sources and in high volumes. So by definition, if you're talking about very low volumes of data, humans can deal with that just fine. When you're talking about huge volumes of data, and I mean in the hundreds, thousands, or millions of pieces of data that might come in a day, no human that I know of can deal with that. And we're going to talk about this cross-domain capability. Multiple types of data. So in the early days, it was events and metrics. So my CPU is at X level, or the response time of an application was 1 second versus 3 seconds. Subsequently, it has included log files, because many applications, that's where they put their error messages, as in log files. Self-learning, that's pretty obvious. And the ability to support multiple infrastructures. I'm sure you all know, and probably in your organizations, there's been a move to cloud. Interestingly, if you've done much reading about IT and COVID-19, all the predictions say that the occurrence of COVID-19 is going to push cloud development much faster than we've seen before. So here is a technology maturity model, and we're going to be getting into a process maturity model next, but I just wanted to go through this. So in the beginning, you look at event correlation, then you move up to detecting patterns, then you go to baselining and anomaly detection. Anomaly detection is very interesting, and one of the things that almost impossible for humans to do. It's looking at multiple metrics, comparing them to baselines of what's normal, and letting you know that something's happening that probably shouldn't be. And also proactive alerting. Proactive alerting is basically taking a look at these patterns and predicting the path of that pattern to see how it might affect things before the actual effect happens. Then you move into the machine learning, and finally integrating all of this with trouble ticketing systems and doing risk analysis. So these are the steps that one would go through, or at least historically have gone through, to get to where we are today. So now with that background on AIOps, I want to do a quick poll. So Jose, if you could put up the poll. And what I'm curious to see is, are you on an AIOps journey? So if you can indicate the level of your plans, whether you don't have any plans, or you've already started implementation, or some time frame of when you are looking to do implementation, if you are working on it.
All
So
right,
I guess
ladies
we'll
and
give that.
gentlemen, go ahead and cast your vote on one out of these 5 options. We have about 25% of you who have voted so far. We'll give you another few seconds here to cast your vote. Where are you on your AIOps journey? Very good, very good. Most of the responses coming in. Outstanding.
I'm dying to know.
I am closing it soon here. Do it quickly. All right, got it. I'm closing and I'm sharing those results. And I'll read them back to you, Michael. What we have here is that we had 54% of the results were investigating. They're investigating right now. And the 25% was the next category was the next one with no plans. So investigating at 54%, no plans, 25%, and then 11% have started implementation, 7% plan to begin in the next couple of years, and 4% plan to begin in the next 12 months.
Okay, that's great to know that that so many of you are in the investigation stage. And no one should feel bad about not starting implementation. According to Gartner, only about 5% of organizations right now are implementing AIOps, but by 2023 or 4, can't remember which, it should be up to 25%. So for those of you who are investigating, you are right in with the major crowd. Okay, so let's now go through the 5 steps to getting to having a full AIOps solution. So the first one is monitoring and consolidating. And most of you, I'm sure, are already doing at least some of this. So I've split the monitoring up into the front end and the back end. So on the front end, and what I mean by that is looking at it from the user's point of view, or as we've commented with DEM, it could be a human user or it could be a bot or other digital process looking at that. Just a quick example of that. If you're using an app and you ask it for a map and it's not Google Maps, it's probably going to put a request into Google Maps to get that. So there's a case where a digital process is talking to another digital process and you want to measure that responsiveness. And APM, as I talked about, application performance management, takes into account not only digital experience management, but also can look at some things in the infrastructure, either from the outside, which there are products that can do that, or combines things with infrastructure monitoring, which is at the bottom. So infrastructure monitoring and NPMD is network performance, and 2 other letters I've honestly forgotten. But anyhow, networks, as we all know, are an important capability. And each of the tools that you implement almost undoubtedly has a database that they use to store whatever they're doing. And if we stop at this point, these are what we basically call silos. So you can have a team doing APM, another team doing DEM, et cetera, and they're in their own little silos. And the first step is to integrate those siloed data into a tool that can consolidate those events and look at the performance metrics. And I'll refer to that at some point as a single pane of glass. This can shift your operations capabilities from having to look at many screens, one for each of the tools, to being able to look at a single screen where all the data that they need is collected. And that gives 2 advantages. If you have a system, if a single pane of glass system can compare events, that's one major benefit. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the other one is that I said people only have to look at one screen. And even if they're the ones who have to do the comparison, the 2 things that they're having to compare are right there. Now, just to give you a sense of how many silos one might have, EMA in one of their studies determined that on average, there were 23 monitoring tools used. Now, one of our systems integrators told us that one of their customers had over 100 tools that they were using to monitor their IT environment. Okay, so I indicated that there's a lot of benefit from just doing this consolidation, and here are some examples of the benefits that you can get from doing event consolidation with some correlation capabilities built in. And you can see these are pretty significant. So Van City, which is a credit union in Canada, 70% improvement in root cause analysis. By the way, most of the time in fixing a problem is in finding where the problem is. And then you can see over Odea Bank, which is in Turkey, 30% improvement in mean time to repair. And I'm sure you all know the cost of downtime for your application, or you've certainly seen the numbers. It can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, per minute. Okay, I mentioned when I talked about the technology maturity curve, I mentioned that we're going to have one on people and process. This is that capability. This comes from Analyst Ovum, and in the handout, you will get access to their report, which I pulled this from. So at its simplest, this is the you crawl, then you walk, then you run. On the left-hand side, basically each individual person is doing whatever they want. If they have a favorite tool, that's what they use. Then as you progress, you get teams who settle on what it is they want to use. Then you get some cross-team capability, DevOps, and so where the ops teams are talking to the dev team and using IT service management, basically your trouble ticketing system, start coming into play. Then you move into a full DevOps capability where basically before any application ever gets put into place, well into the coding phase, operations teams are brought in to provide their perspective on what it is they need. And then ultimately you get to this nirvana, which is customer-centric, operations oriented, where you've got a full AIOps solution and life is wonderful. Very few organizations that I've seen are at that level. So most of them are sitting between the purple and the DevOps. Okay, so we talked about introducing AI, and I mentioned a domain-agnostic model or cross-domain. We're going to get to that in a second. But before you get there, most likely what you're going to do is be at this domain-centric model. And that is the tools that you have got, as they are progressing in their evolution, they're adding AI. And so for every one of these tools or tool categories that I've listed here, I've seen those vendors start to implement AI and machine learning. And when I say AI, you can basically translate that to machine learning, because in fact, AI is a hugely broad topic covering everything from visual analytics, speech analytics, emotional analytics. And what we're really talking about is machine learning and deep machine learning, where basically looking at data, it can find patterns and then alert you when things don't match the patterns that it determines are normal. So this is the next step that many companies go to. Now we get to a more AIOps-centric model, and this is what's called the domain-agnostic model. And the two key elements of this are that all of those siloed databases are now instead feeding into a data lake. A data lake, by the way, is just a really big database or Hadoop kind of structure. Probably deals with structured and unstructured data. What's not, I haven't mentioned so far, but a lot of the AIOps solutions take into account social media data. So you might have Twitter feeds coming in and looking for negative keywords for your application as one of the alert metrics. We never really want to be notified by human beings. That's the problem. We'd like to catch it before that. But as one of my old bosses like to say, human beings are the last step in quality control. Once you've got all this data together, then you apply the AI. And you can understand the benefits pretty quickly. And I'm going to show you an example of this, where I can now start comparing, for example, network data to server data to what users are experiencing, put those all together, and then provide some actionable insights. So the final step in the AIOps journey, and so interestingly, when the analysts started talking about AIOps, they did not include automation. And over about the last 6 to 12 months, if you read the analyst reports on AIOps, they have now started talking about automation. Now, this is something that we felt was very important from the beginning. So basically, once you've now gained that actionable insight, you want to trigger automation to fix the problem that the insight gave you. And we're going to see an example of a company that did this, as I mentioned before. Okay, lest you think that that people are afraid of doing these automated actions, in another study that EMA did, they asked, to what degree you're going to allow automation to happen, or AI to drive automation without human intervention. And as you can see, 96% are willing to use automated actions, and those are split to half that will let it go by itself, and the other half who want to have a human at least look at it. And then you can see only 5% don't allow automated actions, except when they've all been, worked as a batch process, and a human is the one to actually initiate those actions. So this idea of doing automated actions driven by insights that come from somewhere is being accepted, and I think if we were to take this survey 5 years from now, those numbers would be shifted in favor of doing it without human intervention and just human review. So I've mentioned this a couple of times. So we have a large oil services company that's one of our customers. And by the way, they just presented these results at our big user conference. Those presentations are online for viewing. So if anybody's interested in listening to this presentation, you actually get to find out who the company is, but he goes through all the steps that they took to get here. This was all driven for them by the recession that happened in 2000. I can't remember whether it was 2000 or 2008. But in any case, because of that recession, their revenue really dropped, and they needed to do a major headcount reduction. And they realized the only way that that was going to be viable for the company was to start automating. And so they went through the process of identifying the most common problems that already had solutions. So in other words, the siloed team had already written the script, and then went to implement those in a more standardized system. And they just kept chipping away at the problem. And here are the results for 2019. So they've been working on this for 4 years. When we first talked to them, their savings in their first 12 months of operation was 1.2 million. In this latest presentation they gave, they're up to 4 million. And while they don't list it here, you can imagine that if you can carry out 97% of the known problems fully automatically, and by the way, this is one of the companies that does not require human oversight, that is going to reduce your downtime significantly. And I'm not sure whether that number is factored into the 4 million or whether that's really just the man hours. And they know these numbers as a certainty, because one of the things that they did when they built all this automation was to build a dashboard that tracked every automation item that ran, and they knew what the human cost was to implement that. So, whoops. Okay, so Jose, it's time for poll number 2. And what I want to find out here is, of all the things that I've talked about, not all of which are technically AIOps, but they're on the journey to AIOps, which of these your organization has implemented? So, do you have a excuse me, single pane of glass solution, something that collects events and metrics and consolidates those? Are you doing digital experience monitoring, or what one you might know it as application performance monitoring, or APM, because that was the old name? Are you able to correlate and reduce alerts? And then we go to the machine learning, and have you actually done automation of your IT processes? I'm sure many of you have implemented RPA.
So ladies and gentlemen, the poll is active right now. Just start casting your votes. Again, in this case here, you can select all that apply to your context in your organization. Which functions are currently implementing? I'm going to let you have a little bit more time here to cast. We have about half of you who have casted votes at this point. Well done. Just 5 more seconds and we'll close. Very well, very well. So here we go. Closing it, and let's now share these results. So what we have here, Michael, is that which functions are currently implemented. 67%, so the biggest category by far is IT process automation. So 67% IT process automation. The second is at 29%, machine learning and AI, digital experience monitoring, APM, monitored and integrated, and then alert correlation reduction, 21%, and single pane of glass event metric consolidation at 17%. So it looks like a real big focus on IT process automation, 67%, and then a fairly even distribution on the other categories.
I got to say, I am surprised at how many people. I'm not surprised by the IT process automation, because frankly, process automation started when pretty much the first server admin wrote a script to fix a problem. What I am surprised about is how many people are in the machine learning and AI, given that the AIOps number was so low. But so be it. So that's good news. Okay, I mentioned I'm going to talk about RPA and AIOps. So on the left here, you can see this is a typical RPA implementation. So you have robots at the bottom, and you've got the servers. So first off, those robots have to run on servers. And then you've got tasks that are orchestrating all of these robots. And all of this stuff, of course, runs on an infrastructure. The robots themselves will almost guaranteed write log files to indicate how the process that they're running is going. And some of those are going to be error messages. So there's a few things here. First off, your AIOps solution should be able to discover all of the new services that you put in. It should be able to discover the robots as they start up, and then automatically start monitoring those. It should also be monitoring the log files, and there's two benefits to monitoring the log files. One is it may be able to correlate if there are any common errors and give you an alert, an insight that, hey, this error that you're seeing is very common. and it might be something you want to look at. The other thing is the beauty of using, and this basically goes back to the centralized single pane of glass, is the people who write these processes most likely don't work 24/7, or their group doesn't. And so if there is something that's critical that happens, it can also provide information to an alerting system that, if required, could wake somebody up to fix something. Okay, I mentioned I would give you a real life example of a process that AIOps fixed. So here we're going to talk about a drug interaction application. So back in the old days, when a doctor would prescribe something for you, he'd look up that drug in a book and see what drugs should not be used in combination. Of course, quite a while back, that was moved to an app that runs on a phone. I know that's what my doctor does. He pulls out his iPhone and puts in the various medications I'm taking when he wants to give me a new one. So we had this situation happening, and one of our customers, they had this periodic situation where the app was just slowing down, and the doctors were calling in saying, hey, I can't use the app. It's running so poorly. I've gone back to my book. So what they did was they put a digital experience monitor out to test the application, and rather than it being sort of a random occurrence, they now knew exactly when it occurred. And by having the AIOps system take that information and look at all of the things that supported that service or that business process, what they found was there was an index in a database that was getting stale, and that's what was slowing things down. Now, again, I said before that fixing the problem, finding the problem is the biggest part of fixing the problem. And here's a perfect example of that. The fix was so simple. They simply wrote a batch process that ran at the middle of the night that refreshed the index. Problem solved. So there's an example of how getting all the data in and looking at it together can help you solve the problem. So just to wrap up, I'll just talk quickly about some of our capabilities. So I talked about looking at the bottom. I talked about being able to collect a lot of data, and you can see all the collectors that we have. Not to mention we have third-party integrations, and we support over 200 tools and technologies. Our store once, or COSO, which goes for collect once, store once, that is the data lake that I mentioned. And then we have a lot of analytics that sit on top of that. And then finally, we provide many visualizations for both business and IT users. So this little phone one here, whoops, that is a railroad company. And what that shows is the number of tickets sold and the rate at which they're being sold, and compares them to some basic IT metrics. So a business person can look at this, and if the ticket sales match a slowdown in the IT infrastructure, can go pound on their IT people to get it fixed. So finally, a real life example of how this all works. TIM Brazil is a telecom provider, and I'm sure you, like me, when you call into many companies now, what you get is an interactive voice response system. And they were able to figure out what was causing misdirected calls, so calls pointing to the wrong agent, and reduce that by 40%. And I know about 15 years ago, I saw a study that said every time somebody has to pick up the phone, that's about $25, and I'm sure that number's gone way up. And so it's not only that cost, but just think about the frustration. I know I get incredibly frustrated when I get pointed to the wrong place, and then that person has to send me somewhere else, and frequently I have to get back into a queue there. So a lot of benefit, again, to being able to look and evaluate these problems. So with that, Jose, I'm going to pass it over to you for questions. And while that's going on, I'll just mention these are the various assets that we're going to have as a handout. So Jose, questions?
Terrific presentation, Michael. Thank you for sharing that with us. I wanna start by asking you on based on some of the survey results that we saw here today, and some of that group that's getting started on AIOps. They have not really gone very deep into it. They're getting started. You presented so many great use cases and have so much experience. Well, based on what you have learned implementing AIOps, what is the best way of starting if you're new and you have some basic infrastructure in place, but you have not really leveraged what you have shown so far? What are the best practices to get started?
Okay, so as I mentioned in step one, that's probably the easiest way to get started, which is to integrate the tools that you have. So some people will come in with the basically the be all end all solution and tell you, yeah, just get rid of everything you have. That's just not practical for any organization I have ever met. So you need to take um, an attitude of where you're going to integrate the tools that you already have and bring those together. And as we showed, that brings huge benefits. The next thing is to start a pilot project with an AI machine learning situation and get a very well-defined use case. You want to work on one use case, and as we talked about in the organizational changes, you want to get somebody to do an executive to buy into this, because as you move from your use case to broadening this out, you're going to be hitting more and more organizations, and that's going to require an executive sponsor. So those are the two places I would go to for a best place to start.
That's great. That's great insights, Michael. I'm gonna ask you, Michael, that you stop sharing your presentation if you can go so that they can see us on
Certainly.
this screen. Um, And then while Michael is doing that, I'm still monitoring the questions that are coming in on the panel here. So please, feel free to continue to provide those questions, and I'll relay them to Michael. The next one here has to do about definitions and views of AIOps, Michael. And are these definitions and views of AIOps converging? Do you see them converging right now?
Yes. So basically, when this started out, as I showed you in the evolution model, we didn't even really call it AIOps. And various analysts have taken their, provided their own views on this. And I think that there's a couple of things that have happened. One is the definition of AIOps keeps growing. So they're not subtracting anything, but it's as if the analysts talk to somebody and somebody says, well, what about this? And they go, oh, that's a good idea. I'll add that in. So what we've seen is more and more data types being brought in. A perfect example is, and I didn't spend much time on this, is the topology of your IT environment. That originally wasn't taken into account. What they've come to realize is having the topology information makes it much easier to solve the problem, and that's something that the machine learning algorithms can use to speed up the process. The other one, which I did mention, is automation. So in the early days of analysts writing about AIOps, there was no mention of automation. And I don't know whether they're each reading each other's papers and going, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll include that. But yes, there is now a pretty agreed upon definition of what AIOps is. And it boils down to, you've got to do all sorts of infrastructures, public, private cloud, as well as on-prem. You've got to take in all the data types that are available, and you've got to be able to automate the fixes once you've got the insights.
Very good, very good. We have time for one quick final question here, and this one has to do with a business that's not a it's a large business, but does not have a very large IT work group. And the question is related to staffing for to get value out of AI. Do they need to have a data scientist on staff to get the value of out of AI and out of AI ops?
Yeah, so this is one of the big differences between AIOps and the use of AI in general in a company. So when you look at AI used, for example, sales modeling, uh, financial modeling, etc., you have pretty much no place to start. So you have no choice but to get a data scientist to look at the data to try and figure out, okay, what kind of model are we going to build? When you're looking at AIOps, the space that you're trying to analyze is pretty well defined. You're going to get alerts, you're going to get metrics, you're going to get um, topology data, and what you're looking for are, basically performance problems. Because if something goes down hard, you usually know about it pretty quickly from traditional monitoring. And all of that's been built into these systems. Some systems require a little bit of, some training. Other systems, like the one that we provide, are configuration free. You just install it, let it run for about a week, and it will start being able to figure out what's going on in your environment and start providing insights. But basically, it's a data scientist in a box.
Wow, that's impressive. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your thought leadership, your practical experiences with us today. It's been really, really instructive and insightful to see what you have shown us today. So thank you very much.
Well, Jose, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope this was useful to everyone.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will close the session. There will be a short survey that will pop up when you close the session. So we appreciate your feedback. And you do not want to miss our very last session of the day. So we're going to have Vic Nanda, who is the head of quality capabilities and consulting at Nokia, talking to us about how to identify and resolve points of failure in business processes. So Vic is an expert, a seasoned professional and leader in this area, and really looking forward to his presentation. So see you back up at the top of the hour. Thank you.